of caste. We are very happy to have with us here, of course, the publisher, Mr. Anand, but especially happy to have Arundhati Roy, an old friend of the college, if she won't mind me saying that. Although she has come just once before and spoken here, she got a good response from our students, and that was indication of the type of impact that she has on young people. So Arundhati, we are very happy that you have come back to share with us these ideas that you have. Revolutionary ideas, I hope, because our country does require a revolution in ideas, if not in violence, definitely not there. But we do require to rethink our different stances and to once again make an analysis of what is happening in our society. St. Xavier's College has always been open to new ideas, and we think it is our responsibility, especially with the type of resources that we have here in the middle of the city, to encourage this type of dialogue on ideas that are crucial to our times, to our world, and to our society. We are also very happy to have Professor Suryakant from the TIS, Tata Institute. We are happy that he will also share with us his ideas. A big welcome. So without more ado, I request Mr. Anand to take over and to initiate this discussion. Thank you for coming, and all the best.
Thank you, Father Fraser, and thank you for responding so quickly and enthusiastically about helping us host this event here. Dr. Ambedkar is already here. It's his book, Annihilation of Caste, which is being launched. And I would first call Arundhati Roy and Suryakant Vagnare to come onto the stage, because I'm sure all of you here are familiar with Dr. Ambedkar, and many of you here may have read Annihilation of Caste, the 1936 work which was published, self-published by Ambedkar, because the audience for which he wrote it, he wanted to deliver it as a speech, found it unbearable, and they refused to let him come and speak after seeing an advance copy of the book. And it has been nearly 80 years, and what happened was a kind of an early assassination attempt on this book to let it not come out. And the forum that called him was Jat Pat Todak Mandal of Lahore, and the Mandal realized that Ambedkar intended to use that platform to not merely to criticize the practice of caste, but to denounce Hinduism itself. But soon it was translated into 6 languages. Gandhi found fault with the pricing of it. He said it's 8 annas, it should be 4 annas or 2 annas. That was the beginning of his response. But Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste has survived today because it has been printed and reprinted, like most of Ambedkar's large oeuvre, by small, mostly Dalit-owned presses and read by mostly Dalit readers over 7 decades now. It has now the curious distinction of being one of the most obscure as well as the most widely read books in India. This in itself illuminates the iron grid of the caste system. But Ambedkar intended this speech for a privileged caste audience, an audience that has eluded it over the decades, or an audience which has recently, I met a civil service aspirant at a Delhi lunch, and I asked him, he asked me, what is this that you have published recently? It's a book by Ambedkar. So is it the Constitution of India? So that is the level of, couldn't think that it could be a book other than the Constitution of India. He didn't know that there was something called the Annihilation of Caste. He's attempting a civil service exam for the 2nd time. He has cleared mains. So it is to redress this that Ambedkar's books are still not available in regular bookshops. They are available in government presses, and it's a very big challenge to go find Ambedkar's writing. So when I read this, and I also ended up annotating this over the last 7 to 10 years, for instance, there were several things there which pop like questions in my mind. Who is this Jatpat Torak Mandal? Who is Santram who invited him? What happened to Santram? I realized that he died at the age of 101, just 2 kilometers from where I work from in Delhi. Then I found his autobiography, then it led to a whole thing about who he was and where did he come from and why he was a partition refugee in Delhi and why he died there. And I found that there was no scholarship or pamphlet writing which could illuminate me about these questions. And there were more than a dozen Sanskrit couplets that Ambedkar throws with authority at his privileged caste audience, and they've never been decoded, deciphered. Where did he use them from? And Vivek de Broy, the scholar of Sanskrit, he helped us kind of unpack these couplets. And there's several things that Ambedkar says which I couldn't find in books. What is the connection between the communal award and the Roman comitia centuriata? What is the comparison he keeps drawing between caste Hindus and Dalits as between plebeians and patricians? Where does he get these ideas from? What is social endosmosis? Where is he drawing this idea from? What is the C3 people? So all these were attempts, and then this book was reviewed, and at that stage is when I turned to Arundhati Roy, meaning this was 8 to 10 years ago, and then I gave her the annotated version about a year ago, and then this book has been her introduction, which is The Doctor and the Saint. It tries to familiarize reader not just with Ambedkar but with how caste plays out in contemporary India and the historical context of the debate between Ambedkar and Gandhi that followed the publication of Annihilation of Caste. Like 2 days ago, Gopal Guru was saying there are 2 figures whom you have to keep talking about in modern India to understand modern India. That's Gandhi and Ambedkar. This was at the recent 5th annual lecture of the Ambedkar University, Delhi, where Upen Bakshi was speaking and Gopal was responding. In her introduction, Gandhi to Roy describes about a little known side of Gandhi. She shows how his disturbing views on race preceded his views on caste. His views on race when he was for nearly 20 years in South Africa. She says Ambedkar was Gandhi's most formidable adversary. He challenged him not just politically or intellectually, but also morally. So I'm very happy that Suryakant Bagmore has agreed to respond, and I must say that he agreed to graciously step into the place which Ramesh Kamble was to do. Due to ill health, he could not. He informed us about only 4 or 5 days ago. And I'm sorry Suryakant didn't have so much time to spend on the book as he would have liked to. It just reached him about 3 days or 2.5 days ago. And Suryakant has written this book, which is, I managed to get it recently myself, and so did Arundhati, Civility Against Caste. And there's one thing which is there in Thomas Blom Hansen, who endorsed this book and was written an endorsement for this book as well, where he talks about what Bagmore argues. He says, against this, Dalits insist that classical norms of civility, tolerance and equality be respected. So it is this discourse of civility that Ambedkar was talking about. And we hope any conversation on this book, any dialogue happening across the world, social media, anywhere, respects this civility, because it is the tradition to which we all belong. It is the tradition which Ambedkar bequeathed to us. Thank you. Now I'll ask, the plan for the evening is that Arundhati will speak for about 20 minutes and mostly from the book. And Suryakant will respond for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then there will be a conversation. Then we will take questions. Thank you. Over to Arundhati now.
Thank you all for coming. It's always a difficult job to know how to speak about Ambedkar in India, because it always depends on the audience. You know, there are audiences who know nothing, and then there are audiences who know everything. And that just tells us what sort of a society we live in, what sort of intellectual, social and moral barriers there are between us as a people. You know, ever since I wrote The God of Small Things, which as a novel obviously deals with the society that it was written about, for many years I've been writing political essays, most of them directed at the state and about state policy. But here again, I come back to the tyranny of our society. You know, we don't have any state to blame for this. We actually have a constitution that, in the case of caste, is more enlightened than the society that we live in. So when I started researching and reading about Dr. Ambedkar, basically Annihilation of Caste is this text of a speech that was never delivered. And the person who responded to him was Mahatma Gandhi. And there was a debate between the two of them. They were very hostile towards each other, and yet neither asked the others for the other's work to be banned or for the other to be put away in jail. You know, I mean, imagine we talk so much these days about the freedom of speech, and we think we are a free people. But if you read what Mirza Ghalib could write about his relationship with his faith in the 19th century, if you read what Manto could write about Maulanas and Mullahs, if you read what Ambedkar could say about Hinduism, what Nehru could say about Kashmir, we aren't that free now. We are less free than they were. We are less free to say profound and difficult things. Our intellectual space has shrunk, and sadly we think it has expanded because we have these laws and so on, but it has shrunk. And you know, if you have a dictatorship like you had in the Soviet Union, and Stalin was, you know, putting people in jail for writing the poems they wrote or saying the things they said, then you had a very beautiful society with poets like Anna Akhmatova and Mandelstam. But now we are censoring ourselves as a people. It's not the state that is censoring us. We are censoring ourselves as a people, and this is a very sad and dangerous thing. But coming back to the Annihilation of Caste, so I started to write the introduction, and reading Ambedkar took me back to reading Gandhi. And I must say that I couldn't believe the things I was reading. I simply couldn't believe it, you know. And what there is in this introduction is not my interpretation, is not some analysis that I have come out with. It is basically a presentation from the basic and primary source, which is the collected works of Mahatma Gandhi, the writings and speeches of Ambedkar. But these are, I've tried to, as far as possible, keep myself out of it and just present them in their own words. But since we're going to discuss it, I'm going to just read a couple of sections from the introduction so that you get an idea, even if not an overall view, because obviously you'll have to read the book for that. So I mean, I'm sorry for making this assumption, maybe I'm wrong, but I am going to assume that this is an audience which isn't that familiar with the debates around caste that have been going on. But I'm just going to read a few pages from the beginning of my introduction. Annihilation of Caste is the nearly 80-year-old text of a speech that was never delivered. When I first read it, I felt as though somebody had walked into a dim room and opened the windows. Reading Dr. Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar bridges the gap between what most Indians are schooled to believe in and the reality we experience every day of our lives. My father was a Hindu, a Brahmo. I never met him until I was an adult. I grew up with my mother in a Syrian Christian family in Aymanam, a small village in communist-ruled Kerala. And yet, all around me were the fissures and cracks of caste. Ivanhoe had its own Parayan church where Parayan priests preached to an untouchable congregation. Caste was implied in people's names, in the way people referred to each other, in the work they did, in the clothes they wore, in the marriages that were arranged, in the language we spoke. Even so, I never encountered the notion of caste in a single school textbook. Reading Ambedkar alerted me to a gaping hole in our pedagogical universe. Reading him also made it clear why that hole exists and why it will continue to exist until Indian society undergoes radical, revolutionary change. Revolutions can and often have begun with reading. If you have heard of Malala Yousafzai, but not of Surekha Bhotmange, then do read Ambedkar. Malala was only 15 but had already committed several crimes. She was a girl, she lived in the Swat Valley in Pakistan, she was a BBC blogger, she was in a New York Times video, and she went to school. Malala wanted to be a doctor, her father wanted to be a politician, her to be a politician. She was a brave child, and she and her father didn't take heed when the Taliban declared that schools were not meant for girls and threatened to kill her if she didn't stop speaking out against them. In October 2012, a gunman took her off a school bus and put a bullet through her head. Malala was flown to England, where after receiving the best possible medical care, she survived. It was a miracle. The US President and Secretary of State sent messages of support and solidarity. Madonna dedicated a song to her. Malala was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And Gordon Brown, the former British Prime Minister, launched an I Am Malala petition that called on the government of Pakistan to deliver education to every girl child. Surekha Bhotmange was 40 years old and had committed several crimes too. She was a woman, an untouchable Dalit woman who lived in India, and she wasn't dirt poor. She was more educated than her husband, and so she functioned as the head of her family. Dr. Ambedkar was her hero. Like him, her family had renounced Hinduism and converted to Buddhism. Surekha's children were educated. Her two sons, Sudhir and Roshan, had been to college. Her daughter Priyanka was 17 and finishing high school. Surekha and her husband had bought a little plot of land in the village of Khairlanji in Maharashtra. It was surrounded by farms belonging to castes that considered themselves superior to the Mahar caste that Surekha belonged to. Because she was a Dalit and had no right to aspire to a good life, the village panchayat did not permit her to get an electricity connection or to turn her thatched mud hut into a brick house. The villagers would not allow her family to irrigate their fields with water from the canal or draw water from the public well. And they tried to build a public road through her land, and when she protested, they drove their bull carts through her fields and let the cattle loose to feed on her standing crop. So Surekha complains to the police. The police will not listen to her. Then the villagers begin to beat up her relatives and so on. And eventually, the police actually do come and arrest a few people and release them the same day. And that same day, this mob from the village of Khairlanji arrived in Surekha Bhotmange's house, and they basically pulled out Surekha and Priyanka, her daughter, and her two sons. They ordered the boys to rape their mother. When they refused, they lynched them. And then they lynched and killed Surekha Bhotmange and her daughter and her two sons, and their bodies were found floating in a canal. This news, of course, is reported in very minor ways in the press, and that too it's suggested that it's some moral crime that they committed. Surekha Bhotmange and her children lived in a market-friendly democracy, so there were no I Am Surekha petitions from the United Nations to the Indian government, nor any fiats or messages of outrage from heads of state, which was just as well, because we don't want daisy cutters dropped on us because we practice caste. To the untouchables, Ambedkar said, with the sort of nerves that present-day intellectuals in India find hard to summon up. And I'm quoting Dr. Ambedkar here. To the untouchables, Hinduism is a veritable chamber of horrors, unquote. According to the National Crime Records Bureau, a crime is committed against a Dalit by a non-Dalit every 16 minutes. Every day, more than 4 untouchable women are raped by touchables. 13 Dalits are murdered and 6 Dalits are kidnapped. In 2012 alone, all of us remember the protests against the Delhi gang rape and murder victim. That year, 1,500 Dalit women were raped by upper caste men. And that's only the reported rapes. The thumb rule is 1 in 10 are reported, so we are talking about something like 15,000. In 1919, at the height of the movement, the lynchings of black people in the United States, at the height of it, when it was known as the Red Summer, 165 black people were lynched. But in 2012 alone, 651 Dalits were killed in India. If the fundamental rights are opposed, I'm quoting Ambedkar here, if the fundamental rights are opposed by the community, no law, no parliament, no judiciary can guarantee them in the real sense of the word, said Ambedkar. What is the use of fundamental rights to the Negro in America, to the Jews in Germany, and to the untouchables in India? There is no method found for punishing the multitude. Ask any village policeman in India what his job is, and he'll probably tell you it's to keep the peace. That is done most of the time by upholding the caste system. Dalit aspirations are a breach of peace. Annihilation of caste is a breach of peace. So this is just the beginning, then, the introduction to it goes back to place Ambedkar in the tradition of anti-caste intellectuals who started, of course, with the Buddhists and went through the Bhakti sayings and so on. And then Gandhi arrives and basically says that caste is a great thing. It is the genius of Hindu civilization. And he comes from a long tradition of Hindu reformers who, by the turn of the century, are preaching to untouchables, as they were called in those days, because suddenly, governance had changed from the idea of empire to the idea of the nation. And there was this whole thing about representation, and there was a whole anxiety about demography. And suddenly, this whole thing we know as Hindutva, which has nothing to do with religion and everything to do with politics, started then. And the idea was to woo Dalits back into the Hindu fold, but keep them in the basement, keep them in the servants' quarters. And this marked the beginning of a whole new era in the politics of caste in India. But I think we can talk now about it. Yeah? Okay.